Hello everyone and welcome back to Total Warhammer 3. I'm Lord Forwind, this time with a guide on the last of the Chaos Gods, Tzeentch. I've done all the other ones, time to do this one. Okay, Tzeentch, and saying the name is quite difficult because it's not pronounced the way it seems to look, is the probably most confusing of the Chaos Gods in some way. It's designed to be, and the fact it's a god of trickery, knowledge, magic, evolution, manipulation. Yeah, really chaos. The only other one that seems to be close, in my opinion, is kind of Nurgle. Both of those seem the most chaos of the Chaos Gods. Teaches a lot of interesting mechanics, but the main two, and basically the big one is changing of the ways. Winds of magic manipulation is nice, but changing of the ways is completely unlike how the other factions play. So let's get into it. So you've got Kairos Fate Weaver, who's kind of interesting. Supposedly he can see the future out of one head and the past out of the other, but can't see what's happening right at the time, which is interesting, but it seems like it would be problematic. Anyhow, you get some kind of interesting effects. You get reinforcement time prediction accuracy, basically guaranteed, and battle reinforcement time. Basically, you know when the enemy's going to reinforce, if they're going to reinforce, when, and your reinforcements get there faster. Not the most powerful bonuses, but really the faction doesn't need it with some of their other stuff. Plus, your hero's action success chance is up 15%. That's a little bit more useful. Your Lord effects, you unlock unique items that can customize the spell that Kairos can cast. That's interesting. I'm not going to get immensely into that. That's something you kind of have to figure out to some degree yourself. Enemies succeed against him a lot less, and his ambush defense chance because he can kind of see it coming. That's where they start on the map. Let's get into it. Okay, here we go. Starting position for the Tzeentch faction. So, out of all the Chaos God factions, you are the closest to Cathay. In fact, part of the lore is that Kairos was in the process of attacking Cathay when all this kicked off. You're probably going to be the only faction that really is almost guaranteed to be fighting Cathay at some point. You could avoid them, but you could also have the fun of invading them. The other Chaos Gods, they have to conquer you before they can do it, which makes this campaign kind of interesting. You start far enough away from Cathay, they're not about to attack you, but you're going to be at war with them pretty early on. Not the biggest of issues. In fact, there is a Cathay army in your lands. It's kind of a joke. It's just your starting battle. So, in terms of how Tzeentch's faction plays, it's confusing. It's right up there with Nurgle level of complexity, which kind of makes sense because Nurgle and Tzeentch are kind of opposites, just like Slaanesh and Khorne are. So you have this mechanic called grimoires. And the grimoires, they're scattered around the map, basically, but you gain them through battles, building characters, events, blah, 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 blah. Unholy manifestations I found to be one of the more consistent ways of getting them, other than some of the buildings. You're going to spend them on using changing the ways. Technology, which is important because a lot of your good technologies are locked behind spending grimoires on them. And events. So if we are to look at this, obviously we have 100, and now we can check out what you can spend them on. So let's look at, oddly enough, technology first. So in terms of technology, you'll see stuff has a cost. You need to have those grimoires to get the tech. They still cost turns to research, which is interesting. But basically every category, of which there's kind of 9 of them, all told, are locked behind having at least 100, if not 150, to get to some of the really good stuff. So just be aware that you want to save some so you can do research. There's other research you can do that doesn't cost them, but to open up categories, you need them. So which technologies to focus on? Well, let's start at the middle, and then we'll kind of work out from there. So at the middle, you have a series of different options. And honestly, out of them, it depends what you're going for. I found Cult Whisper to grab growth not a bad starting choice, but not the best either. This one here, income from sacking and looting settlements, is solid. The downside is it doesn't actually unlock any technological tree for you. Same thing with Arcane Surge. You only are going to get it from those 4. So the first one I might do would be Way of Deception. It unlocks a new Changing of the Ways ability, Reveal Shroud. Especially if you're just learning the map, this is a really good one because it'll get you vision of areas for a while. If you kind of already know the map, you can pretty much just ignore this one for the whole game. There's really no point in spending the grimoires on it if you do. So I would say the first tree to go down would probably be this tree here, the Way of Deceit. Gift of Mutation is a requirement. I found that to be the best one out of these. Each of these has a different focus, I guess is the best way to describe it. I found this one to be the best in terms of quick expansion. So Gift of Mutation, Spawn of Tzeentch, okay, it's not amazing because you can't do spawns early on. But then you get Forced Rebellion for Changing the Ways, which does what it sounds like, forces a rebellion in the territory, which is quite useful. Teaches a lot about, it's very indirect in gameplay. It's kind of similar to how Slaanesh plays in the sense that you don't just recklessly charge in like Khorne, and you're not like Nurgle using plagues to help your conquest. You're a little bit, you mess around with your opponents while attacking. So not as powerful in terms of combat as you would imagine a manipulator to be. The big reasons I find this tree to be the best one is, first off, if you go all the way down here, you can do Way of War, starting wars between factions. This can help break up areas like Cathay or Kislev, for example. You can cause havoc with them having to open up a new front. AI doesn't respond particularly well to it, but I guess in multiplayer it might be even stronger. Over here, though, you get income from settlement buildings. Getting income is always something of a struggle from buildings. Most of your income comes from settlements, so this just helps with that. And then down here, you get a reduced upkeep for Flamers of Tzeentch. You're going to have a fair amount of them early on, in my experience. But the big one I liked the best here was Scatter Loci, however you say it. Basically gives you recruitment capacity in your provinces, which you only have 2 kind of at the start. So being able to recruit a 3rd unit is quite useful. It allows you to sustain wars a lot better. Otherwise, you kind of turn into a cyclical period, build up an army, send it out, loses units, have to wait, rebuild, keep going for several turns. This allows you to keep up the fight. And if you go up north, you can do basically steal magic from the enemies, and then you get increased ammunition for a good portion of your ranged units. I just found this one the best. Personal preference, though. Do what you like. Over here, you can get what the faction intends to do. Kind of interesting. Knowing what the enemy faction to do only helps so much because you still have to deal with whatever they're doing. Further down here, you get a charge bonus for a unit. Charge bonus of 5. It's okay. It's not amazing. Down here, give war coordination target. It's nice. How often do you use war coordination, though? I don't use it a ton myself. Might be more useful. I haven't fully explored it, but from what I know and what I use of war coordination, I don't take it. Down here, income from raiding. If you raid, take it. If not, don't. Iridescent Touch actually is a solid one. It gives plus corruption in all provinces. I found Tzeentch didn't struggle overwhelmingly hard with corruption, mainly because at the start of the game, Tzeentch is kind of not pressed up against any of the Chaos factions. Really, the only one you're pressed up against is Nurgle, who you kind of either want to conquer or just ignore. In which case, this will help you control your provinces a bit. Up here, you get construction for library buildings. If you build library buildings, take it. Not amazing. Cheaper construction cost, okay. Lower recruitment kink, I'll give them that. That's better. And then final down here, Infernal Gateway for Lord of Change units. You have to have Lord of Change units, but if you do, you have a large area effect damage spell. In my opinion, a much weaker tree than this one, at least at the beginning. As we move over here, you get other ones. Let's do this one first. You get Way of Time, allows you to track armies. Remember, all the well, we haven't got into it, but changing of the ways costs grimoires to use, basically whenever you use it. So this is just another way of you spending them. Up here, you get armor for Chaos Knights. Good if you're building Chaos Knights. You probably should, because they're one of your few solid cavalry units. But you're not going to be building them really early on at the beginning. You got to get your settlements up a bit. Down here, chance of plague spreading reduction, benefits, and leadership when fighting Nurgle. Great if you're fighting Nurgle. What more to say? Down here, way of manipulations. Halt faction is kind of an interesting one. I'll try and cover it later if I fully remember it. Up here, you get an army ability, Storm of Fire. This is a really good one and would probably be the reason you would go down this tree second. It gives you an army ability to use, and that's a pretty good spell. It'll basically destroy most low to mid-level units if it hits right in the middle of the unit. Up here, income from buildings, solid. Obviously, bigger benefit the more buildings you have giving you income. Down here, Treason of Tzeentch. It's a spell, reduces leadership. Pretty useful to route units. Also, +2 control. This is good, especially if you're starting to deal with Nurgle, because of how corruption works. You having high corruption doesn't really reduce your opponent's chaos corruption enough, so it goes down. So plus control is nice. And down here, reduce costs for Doom Knights of Tzeentch. Again, not as strong as the first one, probably stronger than the second one we covered. And then the last one, way of prognostication. Open gates. We'll get into that again a bit later. Endless mutation, replenishment for Forsaken of Tzeentch units. One of your more melee. It's like Tzeentch has a lot of ranged units for a faction. Forsaken of Tzeentch is a melee one, so increased replenishment. It's nice. Reduced upkeep. Nice. Better later in the game when you have more upkeep. Down here, chance of success for cultists. Okay. Down here, spell for Lord of Change. It's a solid one if you get it. Blinding Iridescence, +3 for Iridescent Horrors, which is one of your heroes. That's always nice. Break alliances, again, it's a manipulation one. Just because you break an alliance between two factions doesn't mean they're going to go to war, but it can disrupt alliances, especially if you're going to then attack in a few turns. Getting rid of an alliance means you can avoid fighting one faction, basically, till you're ready. Lord's recruit rank up. Awaken the Sleepers, +3. Overall, we forgot this one. Teleport here. Once you've unlocked the other ways of stuff, ways of manipulation, fate, war, temporal switch, you can unlock this one. You have a unique stance called teleport. This reduces the cost. It's quite nice. And up here, if you have the Cult of Change building built, you get Fires of Change for your Lord of Change units, which is an area effect. Ward save if you're casting. As with all while casting spells, has a very narrow window of benefit, and it is not nearly as powerful as it may sound at first, because it's only when you're casting. So at most, it's going to last 9 seconds. But it does protect your spellcasters just a little bit. And the rest of these, you can kind of figure out when to use them as well. This one here is not bad, though, because it has a chance of increasing your power reserve. Okay, let's go into the changing of the ways here. So reveal faction intentions. You can see where their armies are going. That's again unlocked through technology. Track army. You can see an army's line of sight. Halt faction. You can stop characters from moving for 1 turn. It's useful if you're going to try and race to a settlement before they have defenders there, or prevent defenders from making it to a city type thing. Stop armies from running away from you, I guess. Break alliance. Breaks military defense alliance. It's solid. Reveal shroud. Reveals shroud over all the factions' territory. Again, good if you're learning, just so you can see where they are. Also could be useful to track down like a faction that might have a settlement on halfway across the map, for example. Force rebellion. Forces of rebellion. It's good, especially if a faction's reeling or you've just killed their armies, but you're not strong enough to invade. You could potentially strip a settlement from them, or just force them to divert a unit to handle the settlement. I think Tzeentch's full strength would probably shine more in multiplayer versus other human players than versus the AIs. In my opinion, from playing the campaign, I found I didn't need a lot of these abilities, basically. This one, Open Gates, is quite useful on large capital cities, including the Great Bastion. Allows you to skip building the siege units. Basically, you can just rush in. Downside of just rushing in is you still have to deal with all the enemy units that are there waiting for you. And Tzeentch is not particularly great at straight one-on-one fights. In my opinion, better than Slaanesh. So if you had to rank straight on one-on-one fights for Chaos Gods, I probably should have mentioned this in other videos, probably Khorne, then maybe Nurgle, or Nurgle, then Tzeentch, and then Slaanesh. Nurgle being you shouldn't start a fight without a plague going already. It's just, you don't want to do it. Straight up combat, Tzeentch, Nurgle, probably about equivalent. You'd be able to wreck Slaanesh unless they get close to your units quickly. Over here, war coordination targets, you can basically have a faction send their unit out of settlement. Can be quite useful on using on the ogres to get them to attack Cathay from the south. I used it to great effect. I got the ogres to take like 2 settlements in the south, and the Cathay faction sent their army south, and then I took the Grand Bastion. Forces a war between 2 factions. Is really powerful. The cost is up there, and it tells you how to do this based off the diplomatic relations. Lower is cheaper, and the average corruption you have across the target faction's territory. Out of all the corruptions, this is of the Chaos Guys. This is probably the one you're going to get the biggest benefits from spreading everywhere. Well, Slaanesh is up there too. Just because the more you spread it, the cheaper your grimoires are. And this also is a reason why you might want to do Break Alliance before you do Force War, just so that their relationships are quite low. And then finally, and probably most importantly for Tzeentch, you have the ability to transfer a settlement from one faction to another. Why does this matter? You can transfer it to yourself without a war. You can just steal the settlement. 10 turns cooldown is expensive on grimoires. Much cheaper as you spread corruption. So spread the corruption first. I mainly used in my campaign either to steal an enemy settlement that was valuable or like I wasn't going to go conquer it, but I wanted it. A better use might be to complete a whole area. So like if you own 3 of these and you can't get the last one because it's owned by your ally or someone you don't want to war with, use Changing of the Ways, steal it back, and or not back, steal it, and they'd have to go to war with you to get it back. When I did my first little expansion into this area, which is where it's sending you, I couldn't get to this province without fighting a war, so I just changed ways, stole it from them. We'll get to some more details on expansion later on, in case you're curious. Over here, we have Winds of Magic, but we can't really look at this until I jump forward in time. So let's just hit upon Unholy Manifestations first. So this one here, Scriveners of Insanity, can only be used on an army in a hostile territory. So like we can't use it on ours, and this is true of all their manifestations, but if you can sneak it into an enemy's province, even just the slightest border far away from them, and then cast it, 2 turns you can't move. Afterwards you get grimoires. 15 turn cooldown. I would recommend you use it basically every 15 turns. On just raise a lord, send it into the enemy's lands, cast it, get 200 grimoires every 15 turns. It's quite solid. I liked it a lot personally. This one, Mutagenic Energies, is quite useful. Forces attrition on the army. Kind of odd for Tzeentch to have this. I would have expected it more from like Nurgle, but it's solid anyway. Weakens an army, which considering Tzeentch can't really one-on-one very few factions, this just helps. Magic Flare here. Barrier hit points and range. We'll touch on barrier later, but a boost in barrier hit points is pretty useful on an army. And the final one, Night of Madness, can't move for 3 turns. Upon completion, you get an increase in power reserve for 5 turns. Enemies -50 control. This is amazing at starting rebellions, but you can also do this through the changing of the ways. But it also corrupts the province as well, so you could theoretically hammer them with the control, have a rebellion, have them deal with a rebellion, and then raise another rebellion cheaply. You could be pretty nasty with that one. So let's hit on the last section before we jump forward in time. We have a different stance for a Tzeentch. You have teleport. You have to have 40 winds of magic in reserve. But if you do it, you can teleport past terrain that would normally be impassable. Think the underground or the underway passages of the dwarves Skaven in Greenskins, I think, of Total Warhammer 2. Drawing a blank. It's nice. Costs winds of magic, power reserves. So you have to have winds of magic to use it, but it allows you to jump mountain chains. If you really want to, you could theoretically move it up to here, use it, jump the Great Bastion without having to actually siege it down. You probably want to take the Great Bastion anyway, but if you can't, you can always teleport your way around here and raid their lands behind the Bastion. And then when they come for you, attack the Bastion as well. There's options. Down here, you have channeling, which increases your winds of magic power reserve, which is good, and it's actually more useful on Tzeentch. Tzeentch has a lot to do with the winds of magic in Warhammer, from what I understand. I haven't read the books, but I've done some reading. Anyway, it's important here because of all your different stuff associated with winds of magic, and just in general, you're going to be spending stuff a lot, and you're going to be spending winds of magic, and channeling is the way you get it back in this Total Warhammer 3. It's a little confusing if you've played Total Warhammer 2 and 1. I'm still wrapping my head fully around why they made the change. But several of your lords have traits that can boost the chance of the winds of magic in a province, but not an army increasing in strength. And this is confusing. So the army has a reserve, okay? And then the province that we're in here, the Valerary, has winds of magic blowing. And you kind of have to keep an eye on the two of them. We'll touch on that in one of the saves. So, that's it for this point, so we're going to jump forward in time now. Okay, so rather annoyingly, I don't know if there was an update or what, but my save files that were like 70 or 80 turns into it don't seem to work. So I have quickly played 33 or so turns while making this guide. So sorry if I sound a little frustrated. But here we are, 33 more turns into it, and now we can look at some of the more stuff. So if we look at winds of magic manipulation, here you will see what the winds of magic are. So if we decrease it here, we can increase it here. So this is some great benefits for Tzeentch in the sense that you can then concentrate winds of magic where you know you're maybe fighting later on. So if you're sieging the Great Bastion, concentrate the winds of magic up there and you'll be able to cast more spells, basically. And you can do that pretty freely. It's kind of how Tzeentch plays, if that makes sense. So now winds of magic are tempestuous there. So if we look at one of the armies we had here, right? Winds of magic, 20. Current, 20. Local province wins, -10. Casualty replenishment rate down, leadership down, physical resistance down. Now, if we take the magic from up here, and now we go down here to look at it, it should have changed. Winds of magic, local province wins +10. Still hasn't gotten rid of the casualty replenishment and others. For that, we'd have to spend some time channeling to increase the reserves. It's a little confusing because there's 2 pools of magic. But you can manipulate it freely, which will give you more spell casts, basically. Tzeentch spell casting faction. Let's see. So let's get into heroes. So you have these incandescent horrors, which are kind of your training unit because they have the training and spread control similar to the other ones. However, they are a ranged unit over being a melee unit, and they are a spellcaster. Tzeentch's lore is fairly solid in terms of damage, which makes sense because this is kind of a spell casting chaos faction. Some of these really good. Again, you get protection when casting spells. Cool stuff. You can kind of steal enemy magic, which is nice, which means people who are fighting you can't necessarily cast spells because you'll just steal all their magic prior to that. Also decrease cooldown on some of your spells. Firestorm's solid. Infernal Gateway's nice. Again, a chance to increase your wind of power reserve when channeling magic goes up. You need to channel to get the magic in this game, so this will help. And this one, power recharge rate up as well. I will make a note of this one up here, Burning Chariot and stuff. The Burning Chariot unit is a separate unit, but when you put a Lord on a Burning Chariot, they're flying. And it's quite cool to watch, really. It's a great spot because if you're up above and you're using the blue fire of Tzeentch, it just basically they're floating on they're floating in the sky casting spells on people below them. It's like your ultimate power trip fantasy for someone who wants to play a sorcerer or a wizard. It's just kind of cool. Your other lord here, you've got your cultists. Cultists standard increased mobility that most of the chaos gods have. Some changes though. They have the ability to summon pink horrors and then summon a Lord of Change. You definitely want to get this ability in the sense because the more you use it, it gives you extra units on the battlefield, which is amazing. So rather than just the maximum of 20, even without reinforcements, you can get like 23 or 24 units in the battle, which is solid. Again, another firecaster. This one, fire magic, basically. Also, all your lords hate Nurgle, so you get a bonus to melee attack and weapon strength when fighting Nurgle. But your Tzeentch, and Tzeentch is more of a range faction, so it's less useful than it would sound. Makes your lords and heroes fight better in combat, though. If Nurgle closes with them, and since Nurgle's more of a melee faction, probably will. Yes. Okay, that's where I was. Sorry, I was just thinking for a moment. Let's talk some units and buildings. So let's do buildings first, and then we'll move into units. So if we look at, oops, it's not cooperating with me. There we go. If we look here at the building browser, the difference between the major settlement here, the provincial capital basically, and the minor one is not huge. It's mainly located around their library. So if you're in a major settlement, you build the libraries, you get grimoires per turn. You definitely want to build these buildings, in my opinion, almost every time you can. Getting grimoires, you can get a lot of them, but more always helps. You can use changing of the ways even more often. I use it to steal settlements. Come on, that's really awesome ability. It also gives you income from buildings. Tzeentch definitely wants the income, and the research rate is nice too. I didn't really feel, though I was struggling with the research rate, not building them everywhere at first. Building them just got me through the tech tree really fast. And again, you can get it even higher. I will note, though, a lot of Tzeentch's factions have to do with having strong winds of magic in a province. So that ability to move winds of magic between provinces is very powerful. You should start to think when you play Tzeentch of finding at least one province to start that you own all of the provinces there. And that is going to be your gold and grimoire producing province, basically. You're going to throw down a library in it, and then you're just going to basically build the income building here. And that's the big one. You put the library, income building, and a garrison. Now, for a minor settlement, you get a Stygian well, which spreads corruption and boosts income. So for a minor settlement, you're going to get the income. You're probably going to build the warp plinth here, and then you're going to build a garrison building, and that will make the most money from those minor settlements you can. And because you can shift the Wind of Magic into it, when the Winds of Magic is strong or higher in that province, you'd get an additional 100 income in there. And of course, it stacks with all the bonuses, so it's not just 100; it's more like 200 or something. It's quite useful here. If you're struggling with public order, you build a labyrinth, and then if the Winds of Magic are strong, it's under control. So where you concentrate the Winds of Magic, you're going to have rich, prosperous provinces, and as you shift the Winds of Magic away from those provinces, you're going to struggle with income and public order, pretty much. Also, if you're for the growth for this building, this is how you get the growth: 60 base plus 30. It's not as big of an advantage as additional income is and public order, but it's solid. You definitely want to build one of these in every province at the start just to grow your settlements faster. Later on, replace it with income. Again, Warpstone Locust, the plus 50% chance of removing a trait from a lord visiting the realms of chaos, plus 50. Stick it into major settlement. Your chance of getting rid of those traits is basically guaranteed every turn or two, which is really nice and allows you to, if you fail a realm, to go into another realm much faster than having to wait to get rid of traits. It's just nice. Right now, the discovery of Skaven Undercities is pretty much useless. Got to imagine there'll be DLCs adding in Skaven, at which point this will even be more useful. An interesting thing for Tzeentch is resource producing buildings. It gives you grimoires per turn. It's not as big as, say, a library is, but it's nice. You should build it. Plus, it boosts your income even further. If you have to put it somewhere, unless the province is totally in the corner and safe, I would not replace the garrison building with it. You kind of really want garrison buildings, but I might replace the corruption and bonus income from buildings with it. It kind of, it'll get you 15, which is down from 30, but at least it's something, right? In terms of units, Tzeentch has got a shallower pool in some ways than the other chaos factions. It's kind of interesting. In your minor settlement, you basically have one basic military building that goes up to 3, so try and stick it in a minor settlement if you can, preferably not a settlement that you're going to try and make money or have public order in. This is where you get your basic units. Most Tzeentch units kind of have a range attack, and the higher up they get, the more useful they are, so build the higher tier ones when you have them. But even their low tier units here, these blue horrors, left alone, they have these flaming attacks, which will hurt enemies, and it's just kind of how it functions. If you hit them with warp fire spells, and then you continue to hit them with flaming attacks, they take even more damage. So the missile strength of 21 looks really low, but if they're on fire, it goes up. And a good stack of them put together can kill lords reasonably quickly. Higher if you start taking these pink horrors of Tzeentch, they even have more damage. And then if you go all the way up to the top, the exalted pink horrors, I have had several lords die fighting Tzeentch. Just 5-10 seconds of vulnerability to the range attacks can really melt enemy lords as Tzeentch. It's not bad otherwise. They're decent melee combatants. You'll see that as a description, but they're designed to fight normally. And this is actually a good spot to it. Tzeentch has a unique thing on most of their units called Barrier. It's a barrier that absorbs damage. Think Shield from a lot of other games. It slowly replenishes when you're not in combat. Maximum barrier is based off how much remaining health. This creates a very odd playstyle for Tzeentch in that you want to charge forward, range attack, take range attacks in return, and then retreat to build up your barriers, and then rinse and repeat, basically. Go out, charge, take some damage, lose most of your barrier, retreat, regen the barrier. You kind of want to cycle units in and out of the enemy fire just so that their barriers are used to their best effect. It can be very considerable. I was using the basic Harpies units you have here, Chaos Furies. Furies, I guess not Harpies. I don't know why I said Harpies. They're not really great units, but they have a barrier. So if you send them in, they start to almost lose the barrier. You retreat them, their barrier builds up, you send them in again. You've basically can get periods where your units are dealing rather pathetic damage, I'll give you that, but damage to the enemies without taking damage in return. You retreat and then build it up again. It's kind of like having heal spells without needing to spend time casting heal spells, which is why this building here, which gives barrier replenishment rate up, is very useful on defensive areas where you're going to be attacked a lot, because then your barriers will be more effective. However, the barriers do not replenish when you're under attack, so you have to retreat, which means melee units, or your units in combat with enemies, usually melee units, are going to struggle because it's hard to retreat from those type of combats. So once you engaged in melee combat, the odds of you pulling back to regen a shield are low unless you rout an enemy army. But it does mean that Tzeentch is surprisingly good at taking settlements, because the delay between the tower shots is long enough to let the barriers start to regen sometimes, especially if you dart in and out from behind buildings. I found Tzeentch really good at settlement battles. I was surprised when I did my full campaigns. Then you've got this odd thing for Tzeentch, is that you've got your second basic military building goes all the way up to 5. So you don't really want to build this in minor settlements. You want to build this in the major ones, so you get all the way up. Lower one, you get Tzeentch's Forsaken basic melee unit with a barrier though, so it's a little bit more effective than it might seem from the stats. It's not amazing, but because it's a melee unit, if you're fighting enemy, you're not going to get the barrier, but if it survives and wins the battle, it'll regen the barrier, basically heal 1% of the damage it's taken. It's kind of useful. It's actually not a bad kind of like meat shield unit. If you send it up in front of like the enemy defenses when against a wall, they'll take damage to the barrier and sometimes the units before they start climbing the wall. But once they get right up against the wall and the towers can't hit them, they can regen the barrier before climbing the walls. It's really kind of fascinating. It's just quite interesting. Then you get spawns. Tzeentch's spawn is okay. I won't say it's my favorite of the chaos spawns. The barrier does add something to it, but 1,000 barrier isn't amazing. But because the unit kind of is just unbreakable, it's more useful in terms of the odds of you being able to pull it back while under attack and get it away without having it rout. It's higher. Really, barrier is the way to play Tzeentch. Kind of cycle your units in and out. Then higher up, you get Knights of Tzeentch. This is probably the most useful unit for barriers on, mainly because it's a cav unit, and it's a flying cav unit, that one. This one's just cav. This one's flying. I would almost say the on-ground one I liked better than the flying one. It might be a bit of a heretical statement here. Flying units are really prone to dying to range attacks. The barrier helps, I'll give you that. And the fact that you can get away easily and melee units can't hit you, I mean, you can kind of dive in, do damage, then you really have to rapid click, but you can get your units to kind of fly away, regen the barrier, and repeat. But in terms of most battles, I liked the on-ground cav unit because I could run it into archers in the back of the enemy's lines or whatever range unit they had. And those units are very prone to routing. And once they start routing, they stop attacking your units, so the barrier regens. So the barrier on the Chaos Knights was actually really useful. Over here, you get Screamers. These are flying units, basically most of this tree here. I wasn't really impressed with Screamers. They do some decent damage. I just really wasn't impressed with them, to be honest, but they're a solid flying unit. They're better than your flat Chaos Furies here. Use them against enemies who have flying things. So Cathay is a big one, Nurgle to some degree. And they're really pretty decent at taking out Cathay's flying war machines. And then over here, you've got Flamers of Tzeentch. Again, this is a unit with a very short range, but a very high missile strength. And Tzeentch's units fight from range first and then don't do very well in melee attacks. This one has Flaming attacks, warp flame stuff, so it'll hurt enemy armies and they'll be more vulnerable to other flaming attacks. Again, Tzeentch's numbers are very kind of hard to see, but vulnerable to warp flame increases fire damage by 11% while they have it on and weakens their armor. So hitting enemies with it before you either charge with cav or your range units, which range units in melee combat, probably not the best idea, but it'll help. Let's just put it that way. Further up here, you have Exalted Flamers, which do considerably more damage. 338 versus 1.4k. These things, pretty monstrous in terms of how much damage they do. Left alone, they can kill entire units. They're very powerful. They're a single entity unit, though, so just be aware of it. These ones are 12. This is a 1. On the other hand, it means it's going to soak up a lot more damage before its damage, like the amount of damage it deals, goes down. And it has a barrier, which makes it half decent against range units. And then finally, you get the Burning Chariots. These things, I hesitate to say they're my favorite unit in the game, but they're right up there. They're a flying flaming chariot. I mentioned about on heroes, they're good. These things, they can fly above the battle and rain death down from above. And then when you land them and put them into actual melee combat, they do a lot better than their stats would indicate, mainly because they're a large entity basically, and they knock enemies away in fighting. I managed to send one of these things into a corn army, and it held out way longer than it should have. It's very impressive. And then we've got over here Corruption Cultists. It really doesn't do much other than unlock a technology at the end and give you a Lord of Change. Flying spellcasting monster. Pretty good, half decent at melee combat, single unit, single entity unit. Definitely get them. Don't build too many of them though. Then over here you have your Forges of Change tree, which gives recruit rank, global recruitment capacity, and local recruitment capacity, and unlocks the Tzeentch's version of the Soul Grinder. Tzeentch's version I liked probably the best of the Soul Grinders, mainly because it had barrier and it was really nice. Decent at melee combat, pretty good at range, like most Tzeentch units. Causes terror, which is always a benefit. Plus, the building gives recruit rank bonuses as well, which is good. And Tzeentch has a pretty good garrison, I found, mainly because a lot of Tzeentch units have range. So parking them on the walls to shoot off the walls, it's kind of like having archers. Equivalent in the game might be Cathay, because a lot of Cathay units have range and then melee. You're going to be, not Cathay, what am I saying? Kislev. Kislev has a lot of melee range hybrids. When you're fighting Cathay, Cathay is really the purpose of you to fight for Tzeentch. The struggle I found was killing off the archers of Cathay, which are strong, and Tzeentch's struggle a bit. I almost had to force their melee line to run at my range units and then hit Cathay with cav and flying units and spells from above to try and split that lovely yin-yang bonus they get. Thankfully, Cathay's lords aren't particularly strong individually, so if you focus a bunch of, and you're probably going to have a fair amount of these pink horrors. If you focus a pink horror on a Cathay lord, they're going to melt. That's what I found. So you started with this province. Let's get into expansion now. So you started with this province. You could probably expand this way, get these ones, and maybe even get all the way down to City of Splinters and this province as well, at which you either have to go east to where the ogres live, who are not at war with you at the beginning, which is quite nice because I really don't like Tzeentch's starting location, let's just say. I would almost have preferred Tzeentch, rather than starting here, started like right up here next to Cathay, but they'd be too easy to wipe out in that case. You don't have to worry about Cathay for some time, but as you expand down here, you're just expanding into areas with more Nurgle, who doesn't get along with Tzeentch. Or even if you keep going this way, you'll get into more Nurgle and then Khorne. Tzeentch, I honestly would have liked to have the ability to expand into the ogres more, especially because you have the teleport stance. And it's possible, but the odds are you're going to end up at war with Nurgle, who just doesn't like Tzeentch in general. Thankfully, it's not as bad as Khorne and Slanesh, but it is there. My advice, try to make friends with the Chaos factions if you can. There's another Tzeentch faction up here. pretty good for Confederation if they don't die to Khorne, or even Nurgle. I found they tended to die to Khorne before Nurgle, but that's because Khorne factions are aggressive. But that's the way to go. Really, if you want to make the game more exciting and more fun, try and invade Cathay as Tzeentch. You can get away with not invading them. It's part of the reason you start at war with them is to incentivize the AI and you to attack them. It's fun. Be aware the Great Bastions is tough to take to a large degree. If you're going to attack and take it, you kind of want to hit them when they either have no army in there or around, because then an army plus the Great Bastion's nigh on impossible to take down without like 5 armies. You also want to attack during an attack on the Great Bastion here by the AI randomly spawned units. I advise don't lead it unless you're positive you can take the Grand Bastion on your own. Because in which case, once you breach the Grand Bastion, those other AI armies will swarm into Cathay and do damage. I would almost wait till they've attacked, weakened the Bastions, and then attack the next turn. It's kind of up to you. I found issues coordinating with the Chaos factions here that were attacking. That's it. Focus most of your firepower on one gate. Snake Gate seems to be the best one to try and breach because these two start already developed and will develop faster. But the downside of punching through here is you're right next to the Northern Province's Storm Dragon Lady, and she hits hard. She hits hard. These people up here, much easier to conquer if you can get through the Bastion. Remember, you can teleport past, but in the end, to make things easier, you kind of want to take out the Bastion. And that's about it. Tzeentch is very good at the Chaos Realms because you can do the teleport. The teleport, I should mention, does, just like the Underway, make you immune to attrition, which means getting around into other Chaos corruptions is easier. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure what the Winds of Magic is in the Chaos Realms. I don't think it has a localized Winds of Magic, but you still can do channeling to build up a reserve before you go in. Just be aware as you cast spells. Being in this stance here to get Winds of Magic back does not protect you from corruption, which means you got to be a little bit wary when and how you use it. Tzeentch is a very complex faction, which is why this is a pretty long guide. Moving Winds of Magic around is important, so I kind of went through it. Just think about how you want to use it. You want to remember to always put it on and move it forward while you're attacking. When you're not attacking, focus it on provinces that need to be stable and make money, and then just get in the habit of checking it like every turn or every other turn when you're doing something new, and you'll be pretty good. When you're not fighting and you're not moving quickly, like marching or replenishing armies, stick your armies outside of the settlement and do channeling just so that you can build up power reserve. Tzeentch, more than most factions, survives on having a good Winds of Magic power reserve. Low ones give penalties, higher ones way more beneficial. Yeah, I think that's about it. Remember to use Scriveners of Insanity to generate grimoires early on. They'll be your best source for some time. Other than that, good luck. Good hunting in Grand Cathay if you choose to go that way. Otherwise, good luck dealing with Khorne and Nurgle, who are both a pain to fight as Slaanesh. As either Slaanesh or Tzeentch. Slaanesh, much easier to fight, but is on the other side of them. Good luck. Have fun. Please do like and subscribe if you haven't done so. And I hope to see you all in another guide or another video or even a live stream sometime. Bye for now.